your experience working with Alberto Nunez? You've been working with him for now how long?
For now, since 2016, like, wow, almost 9 years. It's now 8.5 years in total. And it is amazing. Like, he changed everything. When I was there, like, started reaching out to him, like, I was really, like, plateaued. I was, like, not making any progress. I was under recovered, don't know what to do. And he really got me out of that, out of that, what, like, that I'm able to make progress again. And it just, from there it went, it didn't stop. It was amazing. Like, and I see it as like never changing a winning team. And then we stepped on stage. It was amazing. We stepped on stage again with huge progress. And this is just, and we have a very good coach-client relationship in a way. So yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
And he deals with all your training programming as well, right? Like all the programming for training and nutrition. So he does both?
He does both. Since 2016, every training program is everything from him. Yeah. And nutrition-wise as well, like his, like the calorie targets and things like that. Yeah.
So you've really got to experience how the process has evolved with how he delivers his techniques and his strategies for training specifically, I would think.
Yes, like I was like, it evolved a lot from 2016 to now, where like still back in 2016, we've been doing like back squats within the programming and just a leg press, like things what nowadays is a little bit more like, hey, you're doing more of a quad or more of a glute bias, leg press, things like that. A lot of things changed from this point on. And we did like back there, like M-Web sets, like or on a squat, like an M-Web or and things like that.
And of course, you're very transparent with your training on Instagram, meaning you're always putting out your workouts, which I think is really cool. People get to see how you're doing things. So let's dive a little bit into that. I know people are always interested, especially if they can hear from you speak on it. But what is that looking like right now at 6 weeks out? And how did it change from the off season? So when you were in off season, was the training programming the same as it is now? And what are some of the things that have changed?
The training program right now is currently super similar to what I was doing the last bit of my off season. So nothing really changed in a way that much. The only thing I introduced as well is a little bit more, or Alberto, a little bit more myoreps, a little bit more reverse drop sets. And we are doing that also in a way of like getting even more out of less. So this means with myoreps, we can save up a little bit more glycogen in a way. So we don't need to do as many reps to get those efficient reps in. And the same thing with like reverse drop sets in a way of like, you're getting like, right, like that lengthened mid-range portion in without fatiguing this part too much, where technically speaking, the stimulus is a little less compared to getting more out of that lengthened positioning. So it's a way of like managing fatigue during prep, which is, I feel, very important of like getting the most or the max out from less. Where what I often see is like people doing even more on top, while recovery is always plumped during a deficit. So that is one change of like getting even more out of less, what we did. Yeah.
How frequently are you training now at this moment? And I know you mentioned it was the same as off season pretty much, but is it 5 times a week? Do I have that right?
4 days.
Oh, 4 days.
I started 4 days since last prep and had such a good effect on my recovery. I was like, wow. And then I did my first ever off-season training only 4 days a week, and it was amazing. So I was like, wow, this was definitely one of those moves. Like even after 10 years training, you do sometimes things where it's like, wow, that is a very good decision. Like always evolving, right? We never reach that point where we are perfect. There's always like things to make better. And this was one of those aha moments where it was like, wow, that fifth day was a little bit too much, a little overkill all the time.
And I know sometimes the smallest changes in either frequency or volume for someone who's experienced can make a big difference, right?
It can definitely. And especially the more experience you get and advanced you get, like you won't be able to recover from as much. So that is also one thing to keep in mind of like sometimes it can be a smart thing of doing even less because you get so good of getting out something out of that one set compared to like 5 years ago in a way.
Right. The
And the
quality,
fatigue there was also higher. Yeah.
right. The quality has gone up so much with your execution and how close you're able to hit towards failure that you can't handle as much as you once could, right?
Exactly. You get stronger, all of that. Like there's a
Yeah,
lot of variables that play
right.
into it.
With exercise selection, you also have to be quite careful which exercises you're choosing, not only because you're in contest prep, but also because of your experience level. Now you're stronger. You've been doing it for over 12 years now. or 12 years training.
Yeah.
And you have to be quite careful, like what exercise you're selecting from a fatigue and recovery standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. Like what I just did recently was like on the hip extensions, I swapped that out with seated leg curls again because I got some weird sensation on my hamstring that is like almost like whipping.
Oh,
And these are all warning signs when the movement gives me some like weird sensations. Like I can feel like, okay, there is a risk of injury. I swap them out. And then also like from a fatigue perspective, that's definitely also quite important. So I try to like do movements where I still get a great stimulus in, but keeping the fatigue ratio like kind of low. So let's say on a leg press, all those movements, I don't do like any clustering. I do like integrated partials. So up and down, up and down, up and down. Like I don't rest on top because if I rest too long on top for many reps, it would kill me if I do like 3 sets or with that.
yeah, yeah.
So I try to do things like that in a way. Yeah.
You won't rest at the top of a leg press because of the fact that it'll extend the set. It'll just be too long. So
It will be a rest pause set then. Yeah.
yeah,
In a
yeah.
way.
Okay. Also, you were mentioning the frequency. Let's go back there for a second. So 4 days per week, is that looking like an upper lower split at the moment?
Kind of like the first day of the week is like my focus point day. That's just delt and arm day. That
Okay.
is it. The second day is like a quad bias lower session. The third day is a rule upper session, but primarily chest and back. And then the fourth day is like a posterior dom lower session. That is
Okay.
how it looks like.
And
Yeah.
how you distribute your recovery days, i.e., the days you're not doing resistance training. For example, you mentioned you had a chest and back day. Will you still do the posterior day the day after? Will you slide a rest day in there? How does that work for you?
How I do that is like usually I train Monday, Tuesday, I rest on Wednesday, and then I train Thursday, Friday, rest on Saturday, Sunday.
Oh,
However, sometimes I throw another rest day in on a Friday and do my posterior dom session on a Saturday if I feel just not recovered enough for that posterior dom lower session. But if I feel good, I can do it back to back because also on the back stuff, I do like T-bar rows, chest supported, like there's not a real lot of lower back fatigue.
got
So
it.
it's like lat primarily, like single arm lat pull downs, lat dom rows, and chest supported T-bar rows. So my lower back is still quite fresh for that RDL session on Friday. Sometimes it's not though, like for some reason, then I just throw another extra rest in. So I do it a little bit auto-regulative.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're listening to your body, see how you wake up, how you feel on the
That is the
Friday.
main thing.
Yeah, yeah. Have you found that being in contest prep that's a bit more affected or not really? Like versus say the off season where you can kind of do those back-to-back sessions with less issues.
I would say not at all. Like
Okay.
sometimes it sounds very weird, but sometimes I feel even more recovered during a contest prep compared to an off season in a way, because I feel like building new muscle tissue creates even more fatigue in a way. So we're taking a little bit more risks training wise, and we are pushing for that new muscle tissue. And I feel like maintaining the muscle tissue physiologically is a little bit easier. It's just mentally a little harder at some point. That
Wow.
is how I feel sometimes with that.
Yeah, great
Yeah.
perspective, man. These are things I haven't even thought about, to be honest. And I've heard a few people say how when they're gaining, like when they're in a surplus and they're trying to put on muscle, that it could be quite challenging to get in all the food. It makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, because we take more risks usually in the off-season. During a diet, like we are more injury prone. So I wouldn't take that extra rep in where I feel like, hey, maybe not so smart. And yeah, I feel like it's a little more efficient with the recovery this way. It's just mentally, obviously, when you get to like very, very lean levels, elite conditioning levels, it is still physiologically not as stressful. Like, it's just a mental thing, like your body don't want to move. But like physiologically speaking, I feel like in the off season, I'm more fatigued in a way. Nervous, systematic perspective. Holding muscle, I would say, way less stressful than creating new muscle tissue, I would say.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, the fat loss is stressful. That's another story, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's obviously pros and cons on the body, but and it sure it varies from person to person. Some people have a really easy time losing body fat, and some people struggle to gain weight and gain muscle, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I think that also plays a role in what's going to be more demanding and stressful on your body, right?
Yeah, like for me, for instance, I'm someone who has an extremely hard time gaining weight. I would consider myself as like a kind of like hard gainer when it comes to food, where I really have to force feed crazy amounts. And this is probably also reason why at some point maybe the gaining feels harder because I'm at a constant food coma state. at some point during my off season where I like constantly like kind of lethargic and I have to get the foot down. Maybe that's also why it might feel a little harder. Yeah.
Right. I want to dive into some of the execution because
Yeah.
when I look at your execution, the videos you put up on Instagram, it's top notch, man. Like the controlled eccentrics, you're not launching weight, like you're not launching and catching that you might see quite a few bodybuilders doing. Dive into that a little bit. What's the main rationale behind that? Let's talk about injury prevention perspective, but also from a stimulus perspective and how you might have noticed the differences. I don't know how you used to train, but I feel like when we all first start training, it's a little bit sloppy. We're unaware that we're moving through reps quite quickly, but I don't know if that's your experience with it as well.
So the main thing I would say, I definitely had my periods where I was like just moving weights just to move heavy loads in a way of like, okay, hopefully the people behind me look at me and like, oh wow, look at this guy. He's like squatting like 3-4 plates. I was that at like some time until I got like a tons of injuries with that approach. So the main reason why I switched to that training was I was forced to it out of health reasons. I got really every injury you can imagine, like wrist, elbow, my shoulder, my lower back, my knee, everything. And every time I got injured, I was always very down in the way of like, oh, damn, I can't train, I can't make progress. And I think as an ambitious, competitive bodybuilder, like being injured, it's mentally extremely hard thing. And I was like, it happens so frequently. Something is wrong. If you get injured, like, oh, we need to review it. Like, so I was like, something isn't working right. And I'm someone with very small joints as well. Like my wrist or everything, I'm very like small framed. And I started recording my training more, and then I realized, hey, like you are like just dropping the weight too much, or you bouncing too much, or you're using way too heavy load, what you can't really control. And when we don't record ourselves, we don't realize it very often. And then I recorded myself and was focusing more on those things, like give everything more control. Don't be afraid to reduce some load. And then I was like, 1 year passed by, I didn't have a single injury, not a single pain, nothing. I was like, wow. And I grew, I made progress. Like I did physique 1 year versus the next year. I was like, wow, I grew so much. Damn. And I don't have a single injury. And that was like, gave me so much enjoyment because injuries been really like depressing in a way for me. Like really, very bad. And then it was like, damn, this will be, I won't change that. Like, why? Like, I keep on training like that because I see I make gains. I stay most of all healthy. And that is how it evolved in a way. And it's like really like working well because I would say as long as you grow, make progress, you stay healthy. That's the main things. Yeah.
That's incredible, like an incredible message for those who might be experiencing something similar and maybe they want to take a look at how they're executing their reps. And I think there's a lot to be learned there for those who, again, who might be experiencing these joint complaints, these aches, these pains. Yeah, there's programming considerations, maybe nutrition / recovery considerations, but oftentimes it's execution, exercise selection that people need to improve, right?
100%. And my main fear, I tell you, it was like I was so attached to load equals gains for like, wow, like the first 7, 8 years of training. I was like, if I reduce the load, it means like I will lose muscle. I was really like load equals muscle. So, but then I was sometimes looking around the gym. I see guys benching like 3 plates and they're not that big. Or you see like super strong dudes, they're not that big. And my goal is like bodybuilding. I want to get as big as possible. And then I was sometimes looking around, I see guys way bigger, moving less load. So I was like, it's not really that much about the load. It's like how much tension you can get out of that. The way how I train, it makes it as challenging as possible. So you just can't move as much load, but a lot of mechanical tension gets to the muscle.
Amazing, very refreshing. What are you thinking about with some of these repetitions? So let's take an exercise, for example. Let's take your dumbbell presses. Talk us through how you adjust the execution based on maybe certain considerations, we'll say. Maybe certain days are different. Talk us through some of that.
Okay, so when it comes to that, at this point, it becomes for me like a kind of intuition. It would feel wrong if I move in a different way. It's like, I don't know, if you go inside of your car and drive, you do a lot of things automatically. You don't think about it. So that is the point I am at right now, where I don't really have to think about. How I did go there though, was like control. I was like telling myself, control it. And if at some point you can also like feel it. Like I could feel, okay, I don't have control. I go into panic mode. That is a big one. When your body goes into panic mode, it means like somehow surviving the set. And when I have that feeling of like, I have to survive the set, I get into panic mode, it's usually too much load. So what I always aim to is like staying calm throughout the set and controlling the weight instead of weight controlling me. And that is like how I go into like every movement, every set, that I'm like the master of the load. I put full effort, full power into it, but I have like full on control. And that is like how I think about it during the set.
How about things like acceleration, deceleration? Well, negative acceleration is the correct way to say that, but that's me being picky. Like at the ends of the reps, is that something you think about, or is that more automatic as well now? Walk us through a little bit of that part of it.
Like when it comes to acceleration, I kind of like I'm not super hyper explosive with it, because I feel like when you are super hyper explosive, that it's a lot of stretch reflex what we use. That is why, right, that's also the recommendation of doing like long pauses on calf raises. And I do feel even on chest presses, even on leg presses, there can be a huge stretch reflex. And I want to move out of that lengthened position with my muscle and not like helping like having a huge bounce effect of it. So I like to have like a brief pause, especially on pressing movements, also on back movements, just like a half a second. Like I go down, pause for a second, going up. I accelerate. I don't go like too explosive. It just feels better for me that I feel like I move more out of my muscle if I don't go like 100% like a super speed race car, but I still go fast. Like my concentrics are not like slowed down. I wouldn't recommend that. It is like at a like 80, 90 speed on like my concentrics. And then on the eccentrics, I just think like keep control, but the concentrics I also like to do controlled in a way. That's like how I see it. And also the turning point here, that I have like control here. Yeah.
And also, like you mentioned, you're quite in the more advanced stages now. So things are a little bit more automatic in a sense that as long as the exercise is set up in a way that you know the right things are going to be controlling the, like say you're doing a pull down, for example, with me, I know, okay, what I'm supposed to be feeling. And if I'm feeling those muscles the entire way through the repetitions,
Exactly.
I'm good. Like I can move at a pace that makes me feel it more or less. And obviously we want it more. So I will move through that pace. Is it similar for you now?
Very similar. It's like I have a huge awareness at this point of like what is moving the needle. And that is important. Like knowing what moves the needle. And this can be a bunch of things. And experience is a big one. Like you can't teach something like that to a beginner or even intermediate sometimes. It's like it comes over time to have like that awareness in a way of like
Yeah.
knowing, okay, what is actually moving the weight right now?
That's
Yeah.
definitely a skill that can be mastered over time. Like you said, you've been doing this for 12 years, and it takes years to master these things where things can be quite quote unquote automatic, right? But I think for beginners or anybody listening to this who's looking to maybe clean up their execution, I think like a good example that had helped me when I was first starting out with this was like you mentioned the car analogy, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're driving your car and you slam the brakes, which is typical of people exercising, they'll slam at the bottom, they'll kind of slam both ends. It's kind of like driving. Like you slam those brakes, that's not good for your brakes. And people need to
Not
understand.
at all, and especially on squat patterns. Man, my knees had so bad patellar tendonitis. It is so bad for your knees if you do that on like a hack squat pattern, or
Oh,
I mean, some people can get away with it. It's genetically dependent, but a lot of people can't.
that's
Yeah.
true. And also to add to that, just because someone can get away with it doesn't mean it's necessarily good for them in the long term. They might get away with it in the short term, but maybe long term they're creating so much wear and tear that they could be doing things differently and maybe reducing the risk for that in the future, right?
And I think the main reason, that is a little bit about my history. I was doing parkour from 12 until 16, parkour and free running. And I loved that sport. I would probably still do it to this day, but I was forced to stop doing it because of like a jumper's knee, a patella tendonitis. And it was because I was too reckless with parkour. I was 12, 13, 14. I was never doing warm-ups. I was doing like double backflips. I was doing like flips on the street. I was that kind of person of like, I don't think about the future. I'm reckless. And I learned from that. It was so painful to stop with it because I was like stupid during these young years. And then when I was doing bodybuilding, I was like, hey, you need to think long term. And that is why I feel like even bad things in life, it can be very eye-opening, very like learning experience. And I think the way why I do train like that is as well, like because I had to stop a sport I really love because I was acting like not mature, like too reckless in a way.
You know, when I think about parkour, it's funny. I think about that episode. Have you watched The Office, the show?
No,
Oh,
no.
okay. Well, for those listening, if you watch The Office, maybe you remember that episode of Steve Carell with parkour. But nonetheless, parkour is quite an aggressive, and it requires not only a lot of skill, but it's quite demanding on the body, right? You're doing like flips and jumping off buildings and all this crazy stuff,
It's a
right?
lot of that, like this
Right.
movement, like
Impact.
impact, yeah. Yeah, and I was 16 years old. Like I was like, wow, like this can't be good. Like at 16 years old that I have like so bad knee problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now you
So
pain-free, everything feels good on you. Is that
everything
to
is
say?
fine, yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Everything is fine, yeah.
So that's good,
But
man.
my knees are still a little bit like sensitive of like if I would like, I don't know, like use way too much bounce and just jump down, like, my knees would feel it. Yeah. They're still like probably a little older than 29 years old.
Well, that shows the importance, I should say, and the benefits of execution, right? Like people like to discredit it and they're like, oh, it's yeah, you could just get big without worrying about all that. But it's not just about getting big, it's about getting big and staying healthy. And that's what people need to understand.
You don't see a lot of bodybuilders like still killing it within their 50s. You don't see that a lot of times.
That's true.
Like
They have complaints, they have a whole bunch of issues going on with their bodies, and a lot of them tend to blame age, which I get it. There's a lot of more wear and tear, a lot more mileage,
yes, yes,
but
yes.
as execution aside, I also think the selection, like how you design the exercise for yourself, is very misunderstood and needs to be also considered. You know, you can select the wrong exercise but have the right execution. And when I say right execution, I mean you could be doing things in a way that's respectable, that you would think, why am I feeling this issue here? It might not be the right exercise for you. Like it's just not aligning with your path of motion that your joints move in comfortably, and there's so many considerations, right?
So many considerations. I would always say, like, if something is painful, like, okay, maybe try a different setup, some ways around it. And if it's still painful, it's not your movement. Like, I personally have a few, like easy bar, like skull crushers, for instance. I always got elbow pain on those. And there's like a few movements. So, and I'm just not doing them. That is always like a big one. But more often than not, again, like the execution plays also a big role. Sometimes we just get pain because we are moving those, I don't know, like 50-pound dumbbells or like 60-pound dumbbells on the skull crusher. So maybe you should just reduce the load a little.
It could be quite as simple as that, or just aborting the exercise altogether. People get attached to certain exercises. We automatically think something needs to be fixed, but it's most likely just your exercise selection that needs to be addressed. Not everybody, not for every case, but it happens more oftentimes than not. I've seen countless times. You know, oh, change that exercise to this one. All of a sudden, everything's fine. They feel good, and things are progressing, right?
And it trains the same muscle. That is
Yeah,
like the most important thing. Like that's how I
exactly.
always see it. If something hurts, swap it out with something what trains the same muscle and then seeing how that goes, and then it should be fine. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of people in the gyms that are struggling with these kind of aches and pains and think, oh, I got to go to the physio. Oh, right away, I got to go to the doctor. That might be true, but also if you're not considering all the stuff we're mentioning, there might be an answer in there with what we're talking about, right?
100%, 100%. So it's very important of like being open-minded, not like attached to certain movements. I've been there in the past. I was like, you need to do squats for like good legs. You need to do OHP for like good delts and things like that. So letting somewhat go of that can definitely help because especially if the goal is just getting fit, building muscle, it's like we have so much freedom within that when it comes to exercise selection. If you like a power lift, that's a different story, but still, yeah.
Yeah, very true, man. So let's talk a little bit about the volume now. You were talking about the Myoreps, but maybe you want to elaborate a little bit on that for the listeners, how you're approaching your Myoreps specifically.
Like with the Myoreps, I do like one Myorep big set. So I'm doing an activation set, usually like 10 to 15 reps at RPE 10. So to failure, 10 to 15, I'm hitting failure. And then I'm resting usually for like 5 reps, it's like 15 seconds. And then I'm performing as many reps as I can. And it's usually only 2 or 3 reps I can do after that. So when I go to true failure, I rest for like 10, 15 seconds. I cannot get more than 3 reps in most of the time. And then I'm doing that as often until I hit 20 reps in total. So this means if I hit like 12 reps on the activation, I do another 3, I have 15, another 3, 18, another 2, 20. Then I usually also go into partials and I'm done. So I get an equivalent of like 2 to 3 normal sets in when it comes to those efficient, effective reps, which start at like, hey, RPE 7 to 10. And I get those reps in with way less time. And also I don't need to do like that buy-in reps first to get to that point.
And
Yeah.
also, I'm assuming the 10 to 15 reps is also friendlier on the connective tissue and the joints in that regard, right?
Yes, that is one thing to mention. It's so like so friendly to connective tissue. And again, you're getting those like it's a little like almost like blood flow restriction training where you can use very light loads and you can get this efficient reps in like way easier. It would be way harder of doing like, hey, 3 sets of 20 or yeah, like 20 or 25 instead of doing like one myo activation set and then myo rep mini sets. Way easier also from a mental perspective.
So when you're doing your Myoreps, is it normally the 10 to 15 is the first set? Like you wouldn't do, let's say, 5 to 10 reps in the first set with a load that's to failure within that rep range?
I do that on calves only. I like
Okay.
calves a little heavier. On calves, I'm doing that. It's like 6 to 10, and then I work up to 15.
Okay.
And the rest 10 to 15. And another benefit is as well, you stay more focused, I feel. In a way, like you stay more focused throughout those efficient reps. When, let's say, I would have 3 sets of 20, it can be a little easy to lose at some point, like the focus, like the counting, and then doing it with my reps, I'm very focused on all those efficient reps, which is also a nice benefit, especially during the prep where like usually focus at some points can get a hit when you're like on quite depleted and all of that.
Yeah, yeah. So all those sets are to failure. Like that's
Yeah.
okay. And what exercises are you typically doing those with? And which ones do you not do those with?
Right now I'm doing that on calves, seated and straight leg calves. I'm doing that on adductor machine. I'm doing that on rope abs. I'm doing that on lying leg curls. I'm doing that on dips, and I'm doing that on lengthened lateral raises. That is it currently. And I would recommend it also more like on isolation stuff. It can be a little like on an RDL or things like that. It can be a little dangerous, I feel. And not only that, it would wipe me out, I think, on like multi-joint movements.
Or it's because the setup too, like maybe a machine you can get away with it, like a machine press or something, but to do it on a dumbbell press or something would just be ridiculous, I think, because of the setup as well, right?
Yeah, because of the setup. You could maybe do it on a leg press if you are crazy, but I think it would work
Crazy.
too on
Yeah.
a leg press.
Yeah,
It would
yeah.
be very painful, but I think it can be efficient on a leg press, for instance. I think it's
Yeah.
possible. So after you would be
Wrecked. You know what's funny? You're like on a leg press, man, if you're really close to failure, like I'm talking true failure, you're wiped after just one normal set. Forget about Myoreps and all that stuff. Like one set
exactly
wipes me out. Like just one. When it's true, like really close to failure, I'm like on the floor. So
same for me on the RDLs. Yeah,
okay, so there you go. There's levels to this, folks. Like there really is in terms of where are you at in your training career and how long have you been doing it and how long have you been doing it well? That's the thing that you have to
that is
mention there. Yeah, precision, right? You mentioned 20 reps. Like you'll do 10 to 15 and then you'll do these mini sets, these myo reps up until you hit about 20, then you kind of cap it. Why 20
yeah.
specifically? What's the rationale behind that number?
When it comes to like 20, it's like usually it's always like 2 or 3 my websites. It's like easy for like to remember it in a way for me. So once I hit 20, it's like a kind of like progressive overload also in a way. So this means like when I hit like 15 on an activation set, I'm increasing the load the upcoming week. And I will also have like an extra my web set in it. So it's a form also of like progressive overload, how I like to do it with like, it's like kind of like hitting the upper rep range on a movement. Let's say you have 10 to 15, you hit 15, then you increase the load, you start at 10 again, you work your way up, and a little similar with like that my web stuff, how I see it.
Okay, that makes sense. And also, I'm assuming you don't want to go up so high. It's just going to be too much volume. Might be hard to recover from, right? If you go to 30, for
Exactly, yeah.
example, right?
Yes, that is
Yeah.
mostly it, yeah.
then it gets kind of out of hand. Next thing you know, you're doing 17 mini sets, and it's like, okay, this is just too much, right?
That is too much. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's usually always 2 or 3 for me at a time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So yeah, so one activation set and then 2 or 3 mini sets until you hit that 20 or 15, the top end of the rep range, and then you'll increase the load in the following week.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. And on the compounds, are you being a little bit more reserved with the failure stuff?
I would say on the compounds, I go to like almost failure, even on an RDL. Like I go to like technical failure where it's like, okay, I could get another two reps in maybe, but it would be just like my back rounding in,
Mm.
erectors just helping joining in. And I go to like failure from a hamstring perspective and glutes, like from a hip perspective. And same thing also for leg press. So I could get another 2 or 3 reps in if I would do a rest pause set on it. But with the continuous reps, I'm going to actual like RP 9 to 10 on those as well.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, okay. I saw that you were doing this combination, which I thought was really cool. You were doing like the pec, we'll call it a quote unquote pec fly. It was like a, not really a pec, it was like a press slash adduction kind of press around, I think they call it, a
Oh,
press
the
around.
press around I was
Yeah,
doing that a
yeah.
while
But you
ago.
were doing
Yeah.
that before the presses, and then you would kind of like a not pre-exhaust because you weren't supersetting, but you would do that to fatigue the short end first, and then you would hit the lengthen end, right?
Exactly that. And to get it like a pumping in a way, it's like what it benefits a lot of is like you are easier to like feel the chest on the dumbbell presses afterwards. So you get a pump in first, like also like getting that shortened stimulus in, which like it really doesn't affect like this part here is really not affected. So you have a good pump and you can feel the stretch a little bit more as well. And I feel like it's also like opening my scapula a little bit up in a way. So that was amazing. I might bring that back at some point again.
Yeah.
Like doing like those press ones before presses. Very, very beneficial. Yeah.
I know that you mentioned you took the press around out as of recent, right? So what's the rationale? Is it just you kind of got stale? You were like a little bit bored of it?
The main reason is like to just remove a little bit of shortened bias movements in a
Mm.
way of like during prep, right? As of research, like the lengthened portion is more important in a way. So we want to get even more out of less during the prep. So that's mostly why we removed it to like really like making it very, very lengthened bias. And I think it is like not super sustainable of like, hey, like people tend to think black and white, and like, oh, now you need to do everything lengthened, and then they get also injured because hey, that shortened position is still like for health reasons as well, for like connective tissue, quite important. And short term, let's say during a contest prep, it can be fine to keep those shortened portions totally, mostly out of it, just because to manage fatigue in a way. But then after I would bring all those shortened things back again, just for like health, orthopedic reasons as well.
I find that your experience with this as well, but I can recover quite fast from the shortened. Like I've done a workout where it's all shortened specific, like all the
Oh
exercises
yeah, that is
applies to the
true.
shortened
That's
end.
yeah.
I can recover like the next day. Like I have no soreness. I feel great. But with the length and stuff, I feel drained the next day if I'm doing too many length and biased exercises. But like you mentioned, obviously you're doing it for a specific reason. You're kind of following the research and what's maybe showing to have more benefit as far as hypertrophy is concerned, right?
Yeah, and muscle maintenance in this way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's more geared towards, okay, you're stepping on stage, you're trying to be the best version of what you can bring. And yeah, holding on the muscle and growing it is the absolute priority, right?
That is the priority, exactly. And like what you said with the short stuff, I always feel that during the peak weeks, like how easy it is to recover from short and stuff. And that's also why if like since like people doing more lengthened by stuff, you don't need as much volume as well. So that is why also like it's more trending now in a way of like, hey, doing less volume just because most people doing more lengthened by stuff because it's more like one set of more lengthened bias is way more demanding than a set of like a pec deck fly if you compare a dumbbell press versus a pec deck fly. So that's also
That's
one
true.
thing worth mentioning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more efficient. The way right now, the way you're approaching it, it could be more efficient in the sense that you don't need as much total work and you're kind of in and out of the gym maybe a little bit quicker as well.
That as well. Yeah. That is also like one of the benefits,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
interesting. Just the trade-off is the recovery standpoint, obviously, with the DOMs. Do you experience DOMs from quite a bit of length and work that you're doing?
At this point, I'm honest, like not too much. Like I feel like now the longer I train, the less DOMs I experience. So maybe after quads, I experience some DOMs, like on my quads, a little on my hamstrings. But maybe I got so much used to it that it just feels like normal.
Yeah, maybe. Like if you do experience it, are you ever training through a little bit of soreness here and there, or not so
Yeah,
much?
yeah. It usually goes away. Like when I warmed up, it's usually never that bad that it's fine. Like when I
Okay,
have a little soreness, I would train on it. Yeah.
got it. So it's very minuscule amounts of soreness. It's not like debilitating DOMs that you've experienced at this
Like
point.
this one, I like no, it's more like a little like mu muscle fatigue what I feel instead of soreness, if
Okay.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Where would you say you land in terms of the total amount per body part, we'll say, not including overlap? So let's say direct volume. People are curious about this. I'm kind of curious myself now because we're pretty deep into the weeds of this thing. But how many sets per body part per week? Because you are doing it per week. You have a 4-day cycle,
Yes.
we'll call it, that you hit within a week, right? It's not carrying over like, how some people they'll do like push, pull, off,
Yeah.
legs off, and then they don't hit their next
Yes.
leg day until the next week. You're not doing that. You're doing it's all getting taken care of within the week. So yeah, what's that look like for you?
I would say on average 6 to 9 sets
Okay.
on like 6 to 9. So it's quite low, right? Like
Yeah.
6 to 9, I would say. So for chest, for instance, I do like 9 direct sets because that was also a little of a focus point. On lats, I do like only 6 direct sets. On upper back, only 3. Then on the quads, it's like 6 sets and one my website. So you could count it as like 8, 9 as well. And for hamstrings, also quite similar. And also for arms. So like 6 to 9, I would say.
Okay. And
Yeah.
would you count the Myorep sets as just one? So like every additional mini set, you'll just count it as one?
I would count it as like more so like as 2 or 2.5 almost.
Oh.
Like I would say definitely not as one. I would say as two. I would count it as two.
For the listeners who might be
Hmm.
confused now, you'll do your activation set. That's your one set. That counts as one, of course.
That's yes, yes.
Then let's say you did 3 mini sets. Would you count that as now 4 total sets, or would it be more like 2?
Like the mini sets I would count as like more like half a set. So if I do like 4 mini sets, I would count like 2 on top. If I do like 2 mini sets, I would count 1 on top. But it's still like those reps who are causing like the most amount of fatigue. However,
True.
it's still like a little less. It's so hard to pinpoint it, but definitely a little less than one normal straight set, I would say. Yeah.
And the only reason I brought this up, and not because it matters, it's just relative to what you were mentioning, so the listeners can get an idea of how that's
Yeah.
added up. Because you mentioned 6 to 9, so I thought, oh, okay, we were talking about myoreps, and that's why we're talking about this now. But it really doesn't matter how it's like you're getting your sets in. That's what matters with the high effort. It doesn't matter if you count it as 1 or 3, that really doesn't matter. It's just relative to what we were talking about. That's why.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
because people like to fixate on these little details. It's like, okay, what does
Yeah,
that?
like the exact number of like set, like are you doing 7.5 sets or like what
Yeah,
is the exact overlap of that? And it's like a little like, yeah, like that overthinking, like as long as you make the progress and you feel recovered, that's usually always a sign that like, hey, like training is a little more complex than like nutrition, for instance, right? Like when it comes to calories, we have a set expenditure, but training wise, it's a little bit less of like you can exactly say, okay, you need this is perfect for you in a way.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
people, it's so funny when they're talking about like, oh, do you count your bicep volume in your back training, and how do you calculate those sets? And I think, really? Like, why does that really matter?
It's impossible. It's
It's
impossible. It's
impossible,
like,
right? And everybody's going to be so different. Like, how are you doing your pull downs? Did you do your pull downs in a way where it turned into a pretty much a hammer curl because that's all you're
yeah,
pulling with your arms? Because I could literally make a pull down an arm exercise if I wanted to, and I know you can
yeah, that,
too easily.
yeah,
Like I could do it where it's like I'm gripping so tight and it turns into nothing but forearms and biceps where that's all I feel in the whole set. And then I could do it where all I feel is lats and I feel nothing in my elbow flexors.
yeah. And that is like again the experience, like knowing what is moving the needle in a way. Yeah.
Right. Like the execution matters if that's directed towards the goal specific muscles that you're actually trying to train, right?
100%. Like that is like the most important. And then you can like try. That's why there's the recommendation of like the usual like 10 to 20 sets. And I feel like, hey, trying out first the 10 sets, seeing how you respond to that, how you recover with that, how you make progress. And it is always a switching thing. So the more experience you get, usually it goes even a little bit down again because you get more out of those sets. But for some people, they still need like 15 to 20. It's very like individual, and you can feel it. Like, hey, you do 10 sets, you don't make progress, you feel super fresh. That's usually a sign of like doing more. And if you like do, hey, do like 20 sets, you make progress, you feel okay, then you're probably someone who needs that amount. So it's always like being able to listen to the body. The body gives you the feedback. It's like not something like calories, or you can step on the scale and monitor your nutrition. It's like a little different.